chapter 23. We'll just begin with some kirtan. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namine Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharine Nirvishesha Punyavadi Vastutyamritarini Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharine Nirvishesha Punyavadi Vastutyamritarini Jai Shri Krishna Caitanya Prabhu Nityananda Devam Pranam Devasari Gora Bhaktavinda Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Devam Pranam Devasari Gora Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Jaya Krishna Balaram, Jai Krishna Balaram, Krishna Balaram, Jai Krishna Balaram, Jai Krishna Balaram, Krishna Balaram, Krishna Balaram, Jai Krishna Balaram, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitya Gaura, Hari Bol, Nitya Gaura, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitya Gaura, Hari Bol. Bhajan Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jai Jai Prabhupada, Jai Jai Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jai Jai Prabhupada. Shri Krishna Balaram Ki Jai, Shri Junan Yatra Ki Jai, Shri Nitai Gaura Hari Ki Jai, Shri Prabhupada Ki Jai, Shri Nitai Gaura Premanande Hari Hari. So again, thank you all so much for joining us this evening. Going to continue our discussions in text, chapter 23, of the teachings of Lord Caitanya. I apologize that we missed a class last week because of some services in relation to Shri Krishna Janmashtami, which is a very wonderful success. So let us pray to our spiritual masters for their blessings for this class today. Om Jnanatirandasya Gnana Shulakaya Chakshuramritam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupakadamahyam Dati Swapadantikam Om Vishnu Vidaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Mati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pucharini Nirvishesha Srinivadi Vastrati Deshudarini. I also pray for all your blessings to justice to this class today, so that we can better understand the pastimes and teachings of the Lord and deepen our love and services for Him. So in this chapter 23 called Why Study the Vedanta Sutra, the Lord is explaining more to His now followers, Prakashananda Saraswati and the Mayavadi sannyasis of Benares, the importance of actually understanding the Vedanta Sutra in the context of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Right? These sannyasis had studied Vedanta Sutra from a completely Mayavad perspective, and this is what had clouded their understanding of the Lord's teachings. So now that they have heard from Him and they have the taste for hearing, they have asked Him to explain more about Vedanta Sutra and its correct context. And now we are on the third part of this chapter. We're also going to chant the invocation prayer, which is verse 18 of the first chapter of the Caitanya Charitamrita. Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhaktavinda Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhaktavinda Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhaktavinda. And the translation is: Glory to Shri Chaitanya and Nityananda, glory to Advaita Chandra, and glory to all the devotees of Shri Gaura, Lord Chaitanya. So, we said that the importance of studying Vedanta actually implies the importance of studying the Srimad Bhagavatam, because the Srimad Bhagavatam is the commentary on the Vedanta, which is, of course, in the personal sense, referring to Krishna directly, whereas in the Vedanta Sutra and the Upanishads, which the Vedanta Sutra is based on, the Lord is not referenced personally as He is in the Srimad Bhagavatam. And this is what leads the impersonalists to try to use the Vedanta Sutra and the explanations as well in the Upanishads to their advantage. So let us read about the glories of Srimad Bhagavatam. We should understand, therefore, that Srimad Bhagavatam is the real explanation of the Brahma Sutra. So Brahma Sutra is another name, another term for Vedanta Sutra. For it is compiled by the same author, that is, Srimad Bhagavatam and the Vedanta Sutra, or Brahma Sutras, are compiled by the same author, Srila Vyasadeva. In the Garuda Purana, it is said, Srimad Bhagavatam is the authorized explanation of the Brahma Sutra, right? Artho Yam Brahma Sutranam. And it is a further explanation of the Mahabharata. Bharatartha Vinirnayaha. It is the explanation of the Gayatri Mantra, Gayatri Bhashya Ruposal, and the essence of all Vedic knowledge, Vedartha Paribhrimhitaha. This Srimad Bhagavatam, containing 18,000 verses, right, Granto Shtadasha Sahasraha, is known as the explanation of all Vedic literature, Srimad Bhagavata Gita. Right. So this is a very beautiful description from the Garuda Purana. And foolish people who consider themselves scholars in the Vedas and the Vedanta, they tend to reject these statements from the Puranas, saying that the Puranas are stories written for the less intelligent. Right. But the truth is that the Vedas themselves contain these histories, right, which are not stories. histories and praises as well to the personalities in these histories. And the Puranas are merely explaining many truths about what is explained in the Vedantas and illustrating them in the way of pastimes. So we can see that the Vedas and the Puranas are congruent with each other. And it makes complete sense because they were written down by the same author, Srila Vyasadeva. We can understand that an author would not write things, especially in a spiritual and philosophical way, that would be so completely discordant from each other. The actual discordance is due to the interpretation by so-called scholars of today. And this is what causes the Vedas and the Puranas to actually be misunderstood and almost pitted against each other, it seems, in order to suit the explanations of these people. We've said many times before that the Vedic civilization, of course, was the most advanced civilization. Why would they produce literatures that actually digress so much from each other that they would appear to be contradictory, right? We know that there's no such problem actually amongst all these Vedic literatures, because they all are actually Vedic literatures, as Srila Prabhupada explains in the third canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. They all came from the same source, right? The central focus is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And then 5,000 years ago, they all came back to one point, that is Srila Vyasadeva. And he was required to actually record all of these scriptures that had been given in the oral form in writing. So we know the challenges that he faced at this point. Srimad Bhagavatam explains them quite nicely in the beginning, that Srila Vyasadeva was required to record the Vedas as they had been understood up to that point. And due to the natural progression of the ages, the byproducts of Vedic study or the Vedic teachings, that is, the material benefits that one can gain from performing the rituals of the Vedas, those had somehow become the focus, right, by a very materialistic society, we could say. And so it seemed that the Vedas was actually guiding people towards material sense enjoyment, right, what is called karma kanda. Okay, this is what Krishna explains in Bhagavad Gita as the flowery words of the Vedas. So with great unhappiness, he recorded the Vedas as they were. And the Upanishads, although less inclined towards those material benefits of the Vedas, and more towards explaining Brahman, the Supreme Lord himself, were open to very impersonalist interpretation. So we have on one side the predominantly Jnana Yoga interpretations of the Upanishad, the predominantly Karma Yoga interpretations or understanding of the Vedas. And although Srila Vyasadeva had created the Vedanta Sutra as a further commentary on the Upanishad, these written in the same way that the Upanishads were written was also open to interpretation in the impersonalist sense. And this is the reason why Mayavadis really like the Vedanta Sutra, because they can actually explain it very much according to their philosophy, the Advaita philosophy, or the impersonalist philosophy. So Srila Vyasadeva was very unhappy. Srimad Bhagavatam describes this, and enter Narada Muni on the scene, and he explained to Srila Vyasadeva that the reason for your unhappiness is simply because you haven't explained devotional service. That somehow the essence of the Vedas and the Upanishads and the Vedanta themselves have been lost, and you need to actually explain it to people in a way that is very clear, right? The advanced peoples of the previous ages could understand devotional service eventually from their study of the Vedas, of the Upanishads. But the people of this age, they're not able to do the same. You can see from pretty much the mess that the understandings of these scriptures are in this modern age. So Narada Muni had given Srila Vyasadeva the essential 4 verses of Srimad Bhagavatam, called the Chatur Shloki, which we discussed a few classes back. And this Chatur Shloki is the actual direct personal explanation of the Lord and his energies given by the Lord himself. So there's no room for interpretation or misinterpretation. Okay. So these 4 verses had been given by the Lord to Lord Brahma. They were given then to Narada Muni. Narada Muni gave those verses to Srila Vyasadeva, and he expanded the understanding of those verses in the most personal way in the 18,000 verses of Srimad Bhagavatam. So there is no way that these verses can be or should be interpreted in any impersonal sense, although Srila Prabhupada explains in the Srimad Bhagavatam that the Mayavadis do try to do that, although their leader Shankaracharya was very careful not to. The Srimad Bhagavatam is the cream of the Vedas and the direct understanding of the Supreme Lord, and it's a great offense to try to explain it in terms of impersonal philosophy. So, although the Srimad Bhagavatam is indeed written and recorded in the style of a Purana, and that it is describing the truths of these 4 verses in all of the pastimes of the Lord, it's not like a record of ordinary history that the other Puranas are at times. The Srimad Bhagavatam is the transcendental activities of the Lord, and therefore Srimad Bhagavatam is transcendental itself, right? Just as the Lord is able to give liberation, right? He's known as Mukunda. The pastimes of the Lord, being non-different from him, are also able to give liberation. So the Srimad Bhagavatam is actually able to do the same. Just like the Vedic scriptures when they're understood in the correct context. So the Srimad Bhagavatam is actually known as the Mahapurana, right? The Srimad Bhagavatam Mahapurana, right? It's actually an incarnation of Krishna. In the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, the sages of Naimisharanya asked Suta Goswami to explain the essence of all Vedic literature. In answer, Suta Goswami presented Srimad Bhagavatam as the essence of all the Vedas, histories, and other Vedic literatures. Elsewhere in Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 13, Text 15, it is clearly stated that Srimad Bhagavatam is the essence of all Vedanta knowledge, and the one who relishes the knowledge of Srimad Bhagavatam has no taste for studying any other literatures. So it's very clear from the inquiries that the sages of Naimisharanya made at the beginning of Kali Yuga on behalf of the people of Kali Yuga that it was not enough for the Vedas and the Vedanta to just be available for the people, because they could see that the people were never going to be able to understand it correctly. Again, something we can figure from the problems of interpretation in this modern age, right? They were very anxious for the welfare of the people, and they wanted just the essence of the Vedas and the Vedanta for the people to benefit from. So they clearly asked Suta Goswami just for this. They knew that he was vastly learned, but they just wanted the essence. Right? They themselves, of course, were learned and understood what the Vedic scriptures were about. But for the people of this age, they wanted just the essence. So this is emphasized because Suta Goswami then spoke Srimad Bhagavatam. And Srimad Bhagavatam is therefore the essence of the Vedic literature. There is no difference between the Srimad Bhagavatam and the Vedanta, except that the Srimad Bhagavatam is directly the essence, the cream of the Vedanta, the Vedas, whereas the Vedas is now quite full of many other things because of the mistaken understanding that people have about material benefits that they can have from the Vedas. So if one reads just Srimad Bhagavatam and understands that essence, he or she doesn't need to actually read any other scripture. In fact, that person will not have taste for reading anything else, because once one has the essence of something, what is the need for them to actually try to read anything else? Okay. And the most important thing, of course, is that there's no room for interpretation, not from a karma yoga nor a jnana yoga perspective. Srimad Bhagavatam is directly and only about bhakti yoga, the real goal of life. In the very beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam, the purport of the Gayatri Mantra is described. I offer my obeisances unto the Supreme Truth. Thus, from the first verse, Srimad Bhagavatam deals with the Supreme Truth, which is described in the Bhagavatam as the source of the creation, maintenance, and destruction of the cosmic manifestation. Right? The Srimad Bhagavatam, right from the beginning, is only about Krishna, nothing else. Again, no room for interpretation or misinterpretation. Obeisances unto the personality of Godhead, no room for Mayavad or impersonal interpretation. Vasudev directly indicates Lord Sri Krishna, who is the divine son of Vasudev and Devaki. That Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead is more explicitly presented later in Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 3, Text 28. We remember this famous verse known as the Paribhas Sutra of Srimad Bhagavatam, where Vyasadeva asserts that Sri Krishna is the original personality of Godhead. Ete Shamsha Kalaha Pumsaha Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam. And that all others are either his direct or indirect plenary portions or portions of these portions. Srila Jiva Goswami has still more explicitly developed the subject in his Krishna Sandarbha, and Brahma, the original living being, has substantially explained the subject of Sri Krishna in his treatise, Brahma Samhita. The Samaveda also verifies the fact that Lord Sri Krishna is the divine son of Devaki. Okay, so this, of course, helps us understand that Srimad Bhagavatam is about nothing else but Krishna, right from the very first verse. Right, the first line of Srimad Bhagavatam says Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, offering our respectful obeisances unto Krishna, and the rest of the Srimad Bhagavatam is a glorification of the Lord and his devotees. For, of course, glorifying the devotee is on the absolute platform as the Lord, same in quality, and therefore we can get the result of glorifying both, which is devotional service. The irony is that, of course, Srimad Bhagavatam being directly about Krishna is the reason why it is praised by the devotees, and also why it is vilified by the non-devotees. Those who simply cannot accept that Srimad Bhagavatam is the ultimate explanation of the Vedas, because they can't accept that Krishna is the goal of the Vedas. Of course, they can't accept his devotional service either. Perhaps, of course, because they desire to find the God within them. This is why they favor an impersonal explanation, or because they favor another Devata supreme. A lot of the times, the followers of the Devatas are also eventually impersonalists. But the bottom line is that the issue is with them. The issue is with what they want to believe, and not with the Srimad Bhagavatam. Their opinion on Srimad Bhagavatam actually doesn't mean anything. We have the understandings and explanations of the Goswamis. In particular here, Srila Prabhupada is stated Srila Jiva Goswami, but all the Goswamis are empowered servants of the Lord who have come to give us the understanding of bhakti according to the Vedic literature. These understandings were not directly available before Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's appearance. Like we said, people were very advanced, and through their study of the Vedas, through their study of the Upanishads, eventually they would come to Bhakti Yoga, something that is not really happening in this age. We need the direct explanations that the Goswamis are providing, right? The vast expanse of bhakti knowledge that they left in their writings. And as well as something very significant that Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu gave us in terms of bhakti is that one can achieve relationships with Krishna beyond just Dasya Ras, or the relationship of servitude. Before the appearance of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, through bhakti, one could achieve Santaras, right? The ras, or the relationship of neutrality, as well as the relationship of servitude. But there was no real, we could say, possibility of trying to get to the relationships of friendship and parenthood and conjugal love. The storehouse was broken by Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And so in the writings of the Goswamis, there is explanations about these rasas, more deeper explanations that had been given before, or had even been known before. Yeah. So we should be taking our instruction and our understandings about scripture from the Goswamis. Right? We've said before, if we wouldn't trust our money with some smooth talking agent, or we wouldn't trust our education, our material education with a fly-by-night college, We should entrust our spiritual understanding with anyone who sounds good or who can give us some fancy interpretation on scripture without some solid spiritual background, or without even having any evidence in their lives of being transformed by such spiritual knowledge. Could we compare that to the Goswamis, whose reach is amazing up to this present day, but will continue well into the future, right? Especially in Vrindavan, where they established temples and where they wrote most of their powerful bhakti literature, but of course all over the world, where their teachings are being spread. But most of these modern day so-called scholars just have little pockets of influence that fade very quickly, which is again evidence of the very material nature of their understandings. So we must be extremely careful whose interpretations or understandings or realizations of scripture we trust, in order that we get what Krishna wants us to understand from his teachings. Okay. The teachings of the Goswamis are actually the essence of the Vedas in Kali Yuga. This is through the mercy of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. In his prayer, Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 1, Text 1, the author of Srimad Bhagavatam first proposes that Lord Sri Krishna is the primeval Lord, and if any transcendental nomenclature for the absolute personality of Godhead is to be accepted, it should be the name Krishna, meaning all attractive. In the Bhagavad Gita, the Lord has affirmed in many passages that he is the original personality of Godhead, and this was confirmed by Arjuna, who cited great sages like Narada, Vyasa, and many others. So, Srila Prabhupada has nicely explained this in many places, that of all the names of God, Krishna actually sums up all his characteristics, because Krishna means all attractive. Okay? So we can understand this from a crude material example, that people are attractive in this world for various attributes that they may have, and that draws other people to them. So somebody who's very wealthy, somebody who's very talented, someone's very powerful, someone's very good looking, right? To the degree that they possess these attributes, they have a lot of following, a lot of fans, a big entourage, and so on. So we can see that the personality of Godhead, who is supremely attractive, would therefore be able to attract all the living entities of the universe to his devotional service. This is what the Vedas and Srimad Bhagavatam are ultimately teaching, how we can come to that devotional service, because this is what situates us in the spiritual world and liberates us from the material world. Right? All of the Vedic teachings, and of course, Srimad Bhagavatam being the cream of the Vedas, included in that. All of the Vedic teachings are to help us to do that, right? To ultimately liberate us from this world, situate us in the spiritual world. So therefore, Srimad Bhagavatam, of course, like we said, directly referencing Krishna, begins with addressing the Supreme Absolute Truth as Krishna. No room for interpretation, right? So that we understand that through the Srimad Bhagavatam, we will be attracted to Krishna. We will be attracted to his devotional service, and we will be liberated through that service. Okay. So Krishna himself asserts this many times in the most foundational literature of what we call Hinduism, right? The Sanatana Dharma. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna explains in many places how he is the Supreme Personality of Godhead directly. Right? And we said before that there is no other literature where any other personality within Sanatana Dharma actually asserts themselves as the same. And Arjuna concurs. What is interesting is that in the 11th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, where Arjuna does substantiate that Krishna is the Supreme Lord, he states that there are other sages who have also stated this, namely Narada, Vasita, Devala, and Vyasa. So once again, we see that Vyasadeva is being stated as an authority who accepts Krishna as the personality of Godhead, Param Dhamma, Param Brahma, Param Dhamma, Pavitram Paramam Bhavam. So if Vyasadeva is being stated in one Vedic literature, the Bhagavad Gita, as someone who has accepted Krishna as the supreme Brahman, the supreme refuge, the supreme pure, the supreme personality of Godhead, why would Srila Vyasadeva then write the Vedanta Sutra from an impersonal perspective and state that the Brahman is supreme and that Krishna is product, a form of material nature, right? Basically what the impersonal sense is. There has to be a congruency, we state again, between what these great teachers are stating in one side and being quoted on the other side and writing on one side. It's an insult to these personalities to assume that they don't know what they're talking about and that there's 3 or 4 different ways that they've stated what they believe. One in the Veda, one in the Vedanta, one in the Bhagavad Gita, right? It doesn't make any sense. Okay. It is again a mistake of modern interpretation. There's no flaws within the teachings of the Vedas, within the writings of Srila Vyasadeva. And all of these have come from Krishna, Supreme Personality of Godhead. Also in the Padma Purana, it is stated that of the innumerable names of the Lord, the name Krishna is the principal one. Therefore, although the name Vasudeva indicates the plenary portion of the personality of Godhead, and although all the different forms of the Lord are identical with Vasudeva, in this text, Vasudeva principally indicates the divine son of Vasudeva and Devaki. So we have to explain the Sanskrit here so we don't get confused. When the letter, what we know as A, is used in the English context, whether A is pronounced as A, or maybe in a short form as A, it's all the same letter. But in Sanskrit, there's 2 forms of what we know as A. There's a short A pronounced as A, and there's a long A pronounced as A. So A and A. And these words are so different, these letters are so different that when they are used in their short form or their long form, they become completely different. So let's take the names here. When the short form of A is used in the name Vasudev, V-A, short A, Vasudev, then it refers to Krishna's father, Vasudev. But when that same name is written with a long A, the first A is a long A, Vasudev, then it becomes Krishna. So we understand the name Vasudev, that is Krishna, in 2 contexts. One is that it refers to the expansions of Krishna, right? As Sri Prabhupada is explaining here. So all the different forms of the Lord are identical with Vasudev. They can all be called Vasudev. But also in Sanskrit, someone can be named after their parents, right? They can be given a name related to their parents' name. So the Pandavas, for example, their father was Pandu, so they were called Pandava. And their mother was named Kunti, and so they are called Kaunteya. So Krishna's father, Vasudev, means that Krishna can also be called Vasudev from that perspective, right? A name that is derived from his father. So it's very important, it's meaningful that in the beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam, we said that first line is Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, that Srila Vyasadeva is offering his obeisances to Vasudev, not just as all the forms of the Lord, but specifically as Krishna, like the son of Vasudeva. So whereas all the forms of the Lord can be called Vasudeva in one sense, as expansions, only he can be called Vasudeva as the son of Vasudeva. Hope that was clear. So it means that Srila Vyasadeva is very specifically speaking about Krishna when he says that Krishna is the supreme absolute truth, even above all his other expansions. And of course, this leaves no room for any other personality, Devata, or great human to be ever taken as the absolute truth. And later on, as we stated, in the 3rd chapter of the 1st canto, Srila Vyasadeva further substantiates this by saying Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam. So he makes it very clear that this whole Srimad Bhagavatam is actually about the supreme absolute truth, Krishna, above all else. Sri Krishna is always meditated upon by the Paramahamsas, those who are most perfect in the renounced order of life. Vasudeva, or Lord Sri Krishna, is the cause of all causes, and everything that exists is an emanation from him. How this is so is explained in later chapters of Srimad Bhagavatam. So the whole Srimad Bhagavatam is actually an explanation of how Krishna is the cause of all causes, all incarnations, everything that is, beginning with the first few cantos describing the whole process of creation from Krishna. Caitanya Mahaprabhu described Srimad Bhagavatam as the spotless Purana because it contains transcendental narrations of the pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. So there is nothing else in Srimad Bhagavatam but Krishna. The other Puranas may speak about some of the pastimes of the Lord, but they also speak about other pastimes, and so they're not considered spotless. So the interpretation of what is spotless or what is truly spiritual or transcendental is difficult for people to understand in this age, because modern understanding of what is spiritual is a little bit vague. So basically, anything that is a little imperceptible to us is generally taken as spiritual. People take spirits, or what you'd consider commonly spirits, ghosts, ethereal beings, they take that to be spiritual. They take mystic powers to be spiritual, phenomena like light orbs, other such things to be spiritual, sciences like astrology. Basically, if something is beyond our gross perception, it's just considered spiritual, and that's not actually true. And that is simply because in modern day, there's no understanding of subtle matter. It's only in the Vedic teachings that we actually understand that there is the gross matter that is made up of earth, water, fire, air, and ether that we are all able to perceive all the time. And that there is also a concept of subtle matter, mind, intelligence, false ego. And this may be imperceptible to us, but it's still material. It's actually still belonging to this world. What is beyond all of this, what is transcendental, that is really spiritual. And so literature that is solely about that transcendental subject matter, Krishna and what is related to him, that is spiritual literature. And since the Srimad Bhagavatam completely relates to Krishna and all transcendental matters, the Srimad Bhagavatam is called spotless. Srimad Bhagavatam alone is the spotless Purana. The history of Srimad Bhagavatam is also very glorious. Srila Vyasadeva, drawing on his mature experience of transcendental knowledge, compiled it under the instruction of Sri Naradaji, his spiritual master. Vyasadeva had compiled all the Vedic literatures, the four Vedas, the Vedanta Sutra or Brahma Sutra, the Puranas and the Mahabharata. Yet he was not satisfied. His dissatisfaction was observed by his spiritual master, and thus Narada advised him to write about the transcendental activities of the Lord, Sri Krishna. Sri Krishna's transcendental activities are specifically described in the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, the canto considered to contain the substance of the whole work. One should not approach the 10th canto immediately, but should approach it gradually by developing knowledge of the subject matters first presented. So, like we said, Srimad Bhagavatam contains the explanation of how everything emanates from Krishna, beginning with creation of the universe, the emanation of all expansions and incarnations, building up to the appearance of the Lord himself and all his pastimes in the 10th canto. But we don't go straight to those explanations in the 10th canto because we're not spiritually mature enough for it yet. Eventually, we must, though, get to those pastimes, because there we understand what the 5 rasas that we explained earlier, which we must be situated in, are. Right? It's only through the pastimes of Krishna that we're able to see the full development of those rasas, as well as how we can attain those rasas. Because generally, for most of the forms of the Lord, there isn't an opportunity to engage in those rasas. Mostly it's up to Dasi ras. And even if there is perhaps parental rasas or rasas of friendship, those are confined to the Lord's very close personal associates. But of course, in Vrindavan, Krishna is associating with many, many, many personalities and all kinds of different rasas. This is our opportunity to actually associate with him also there. And this is what ultimate liberation is. to develop our relationship with Him so that we can enter into the spiritual world in these relationships. We can't take our consciousness as it is there. We can't imagine what it would be like if you could pitch up in the spiritual world thinking oneself South African, acting in one's own occupation, according to one's predilections and desires, and the way one understands things according to one's current false ego, right? The consciousness must be developed according to what the consciousness of the spiritual world is in order to fit in there, right? For the pastimes of the Lord to continue wonderfully as they are. So the Srimad Bhagavatam, in guiding us how to be situated in the spiritual world, gives us the descriptions of the Lord's wonderful pastimes in the 10th canto, so that we can attain to that eventually. But we must come to that understanding gradually. We can't just jump straight to the 10th canto. We are always advised that we progress gradually from the first canto through to the 9th canto and then to the 10th canto, because through the understanding and the purification that we get from this build up to the 10th canto, we'll be mature enough to understand those pastimes in the 10th canto properly without offenses, so that we can actually develop our relationships to the Lord properly. Generally, a person with a philosophical mind is inquisitive to learn of the origin of the creation. He sees the night sky and naturally asks, what are the stars? How are they situated? Who lives there? And so on. All these inquiries are quite natural for a human being because his consciousness is more developed than the animals. In answer to such inquiries, the author of Srimad Bhagavatam says that the Lord is the origin of the creation. He is not only the creator, but the maintainer and annihilator as well. The manifested cosmic nature is created at a certain period by the will of the Lord. It is maintained for some time, and finally it is annihilated by his will. Thus, he is the supreme will behind all activities. So this is also significant that the Srimad Bhagavatam begins with answering this most basic of inquiries, because we should be asking ourselves these questions all the time, not just when we have some difficulties. Generally, we only question the nature of the world and why things are happening as they are when we go through difficulties, and we can see why we periodically need those difficulties in our lives in order to get out of our complacency. It's very easy to just accept things when everything is going right, because this is what the soul wants. It wants that peace. It wants that peace of mind that comes from everything just going as we want it to. But the fact that we can't get it in this world is a sign that this is not the place that we are eventually meant to be in. If we were able to find that peace that we are craving all the time, which of course is an indication of our eternal nature, if we were able to find that peace here, then certainly that would indicate that this is where we're meant to stay. But the fact that we want it but we can't get it should make us think, well, where can we get it from, or where should we get it from? This is what the human being should be questioning all the time. Right? The fact is that it's all beings that are looking for that ultimate peace, right? Animals are looking for that. Birds are looking for that. Aquatics are looking for that, right? Every creature just wants to be peaceful. And this is the nature of the soul. So in looking for that eternal home, in looking for that eternal peace, that sa shantim adhigacchati, as Srimad Bhagavad Gita as it is describes, which we are tasting in a very temporary way here in the material world. We ask the questions and we get led to the answers. When we ask sincerely, then the super soul from within guides us to where we can find the answers. And the Srimad Bhagavatam starts with those answers directly. It starts by explaining who created this world, right? In the very first verse, why this first world was created, where that eternal world of peace is, right? The spiritual world, and that we should meditate on the Lord. All of this in the first verse. We meditate on the Lord through devotional service, and through that meditation, right, which becomes that complete absorption in Him. This is how we attain Him, how we attain that spiritual world. Of course, there are atheists of various categories who do not believe in the Creator, but that is due only to their poor fund of knowledge. The modern scientists create Sputniks, and by some arrangement or other, they are thrown into outer space to fly, for some time under the control of a scientist far away. All the universes and the innumerable planets within them are similar to such Sputniks, and they are all controlled by the Supreme, by the personality of Godhead. So yes, there are those who reject the idea of a creator. They have a lot of weak arguments, like they can't see a creator and they can't believe that bad things should happen, so there can't be a God, and many other things that can be very easily addressed. Um, the thing that can't be addressed is the idea that such a world um, of great precision and regularity can actually just happen on its own and be existing on its own. There is no evidence at all that anything can just be created and work perfectly all by itself. And so, this most wonderful creation of all, the universe, certainly has to have some intelligent creator behind it. In the Vedic literature, it is said that the absolute truth, the personality of Godhead, is the chief among all living personalities. All living beings, from the first created being, Brahma, down to the smallest ant, are individual living entities. And above Brahma, there are many other living beings with individual capacities. The personality of Godhead himself is also a living being, as much an individual as other living beings. But the Supreme Lord is the supreme living being with the greatest mind and the supermost inconceivable energies in great variety. If a man's mind can produce a Sputnik, we can very easily imagine that a mind higher than a man's can produce wonderful things, far superior to man-made Sputniks. A reasonable person will accept this argument, but stubborn, obstinate people will not. So this is very clear. We can observe the personal and individual natures of everyone around us, right? And understand that the Supreme Lord, who is the source of everything, is also the Supreme Person. And as much as we also have creative energies by which we can do, well, simply put, wonderful things, at times, the Lord has supreme and unlimited energies that can produce even more extraordinary, unlimited, and amazing creations, right? But again, only the stubborn and obstinate can't understand this. This also makes them extremely unfortunate. Srila Vyasadeva at once accepts the Supreme Mind as Parameshwar, the Supreme Controller, and offers his respectful obeisances unto him. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. As stated in the Bhagavad Gita and all other scriptures written by Srila Vyasadeva, that Parameshwar is Sri Krishna himself. This is specifically stated in Srimad Bhagavatam. In the Bhagavad Gita, the Lord himself says that there is no Paratattva or Samabonam other than him. Therefore, the author, that is Srila Vyasadeva, at once worships the Paratattva, Sri Krishna, whose transcendental activities are described in the 10th canto. Okay, so right at the beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam, Srila Vyasadeva is taking up where Krishna left off in Bhagavad Gita. Krishna had explained many times throughout Bhagavad Gita how he is the Supreme Lord, and at the end he tells Arjuna to surrender to him. Srimad Bhagavatam is starting to explain from that point onwards how we can surrender by describing devotional service. Right from the first verse, how we need to be meditating on the Supreme Lord always. Right? This is devotional service. And all other works of Srila Vyasadeva say the same. Right? All works say the same. Why is he going to digress in all his various literatures? This is, of course, a misunderstanding of the modern commentator. The other works may speak of the Lord a little indirectly. There may be spots of other histories, but the Srimad Bhagavatam is direct and spotless, and this is what we need to be studying and understanding in order to get the direct understanding of the Lord in this age. Unscrupulous persons go at once to the 10th canto, especially to the 5 chapters in which Srila Vyasadeva has kindly described the Lord's rasa dance. However, this portion of Srimad Bhagavatam is the most confidential part of that great literature. So the problem is that those people who refuse to accept Krishna as the supreme creator think of him as some historical personality. So they take some debauched understanding of his rasa dance, and it holds no deeper significance to them. Right? They just take it as some mundane romance, and they get some gratification from it, which is a very tragic misinterpretation of what is actually the deepest love that a soul can experience with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That it simply cannot be approached by the immature and the unintelligent, by the spiritually underdeveloped, and this is why it is very necessary that we work through the first 9 cantos before we get to the 10th canto. Unless one is thoroughly accomplished in the transcendental knowledge of the Lord, one is sure to misunderstand the Lord's worshipable transcendental pastimes in the rasa dance. and his loving dealings with the gopis. The subject matter is highly spiritual and technical, and only liberated personalities who have gradually attained the stage of Paramahamsa can transcendently relish the worshipable rasa dance. So we have the mercy of Srila Prabhupada, who has given us all these translations, we said, as well as, and of course, the translations of the writings of the Goswamis. We'll start with the Nectar of Instruction, the Nectar of Devotion, very essential literatures for progression and devotional service. We read Krishna's teachings in the Bhagavad Gita, and we build to the Srimad Bhagavatam like that through the first 9 cantos, and then we can get through to the 10th canto in the proper understanding through the mercy of the spiritual master and the Vaishnavas. So this process has been given to us, and this is what we should actually take to in this age, so that we have all the proper understandings of the Supreme Lord and how to attain Him. So thank you so much for your kind attention. We are going to continue with chapter 23 next week with part 4. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Shri Gaura Hari ki jai, Shri Krishna Balaram ki jai. Are there any questions or comments, any points that I can try and clarify? Sorry for all the background noise.
Hare Krishna, dear Mataji. Thank you very much for wonderful class.
Hare Krishna, Mataji.
Dandava Pranam. I have one question. If this Srimad Bhagavatam is received in 2 lines, one from Lord Sankarshan, and then Sanat Kumar, and then Sankyana Muni, to Parashara, Brihaspati, and to Maitreya, or just from Vyasudev? Here I have something unclear in my mind. Or we received it first from oral perception, and from Vyasudev it was written when he compiled all the Vedas. Hare Krishna, thank you much.
So I was losing a little bit in between, but I think you were saying that it had been received through Lord Sankarshan and Sankyana Muni and so on to Maitreya Muni, and then it had also been received through Brahma, Narada, and Srila Vyasadeva, right? Do I understand correctly?
Right.
That is 2 ways. Okay. So Srila Vyasadeva then did actually compile what he had heard from Narada Muni, right? This is what we know was that original Srimad Bhagavatam, and he explained that to Sukadeva Goswami, right? We remember that from the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, that when Sukadeva Goswami was born, he actually just left his father's ashram, and he had to be attracted back by hearing that famous verse from the 3rd canto, beginning with Aho Baki. So when he came back, his father enlightened him on what his father had written as Srimad Bhagavatam. Right? Is that clear so far? That is what he had received. That is what Vyasadeva had received from Narada Muni. Right? He had written that. He had explained it to Shukadeva Goswami. Now we remember that what Shukadeva Goswami had actually explained was to Maharaj Parikshit was what he had heard from his father plus his own realizations. Right? So it was more than what his father had actually taught him. Because we also explained that it's important for us to realize the knowledge, because then it is actually in the same line as what we have been taught, so it's authorized. So he achieved, Srila Shukadeva Goswami had heard from his father what had been heard from by his father from Narada Muni, what had been heard by Lord Brahma coming from Krishna, like that. But he also further realized it, and in the audience was his father Vyasadeva. So his father actually, we could say, liked his son's version, right? And also then took that to be, right, a more, we could say a more, like the latest version of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And then Sutra Goswami had also heard from Shukadeva Goswami. And so we see that in this Srimad Bhagavatam, we're also hearing what is Suta Goswami speaking to the sages in Naimisharanya. He's speaking about what Narada had explained to Vyasadeva. He's speaking about what Shukadev had explained to Maharaj Parikshit. And he's also speaking about what Maitreya Muni explained to Vidura, which is also coming from Lord Sankarshan. Is that clear, Mataji? So basically,
Yes, Mataji.
what we are getting now, so what we're getting now in the Srimad Bhagavatam is actually all these conversations coming together. All of this is actually different ways of the Srimad Bhagavatam being explained by all these realized teachers. So all the different lines are all coming together in what we have as the Srimad Bhagavatam. Is that
Thank you
more
very
clear?
much, dear Mataji. Yes, it's clear now to me. Thank you very much, Dandava Pranam.
Thank you.
Haribol.
Thank you. So we're getting the benefit of all the realizations of all these teachers, right? As they are helping us understand what Krishna originally explained in those 4 verses to Lord Brahma. Are there any other questions or comments? Anything else to clarify? If there are none, then we're going to discuss a little bit about the very wonderful events that are happening in this week and the next. So we've been observing from Sunday, Julan Yatra. This is a commemoration of the swing pastimes of Radha and Krishna in Vrindavan. So the devotees have been swinging their lordships, and that will continue till tomorrow. And so, if possible, if you haven't already, or even if you have, please attend to your local ISKCON center and get an opportunity to swing their lordships one more time. And you'll also be able to join in the most auspicious event of Balaram Purnim tomorrow also. So this is a very special day for the entire universe, because actually the whole universe originates from Lord Balaram. This has been covered a little bit by misinterpretation, which we discussed. The people kind of lost the understanding of the transcendental position of Lord Balaram. But he is actually the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He's described as the second body of Krishna, his first expansion, as well as Krishna's brother. And he carries out the creative functions of both the spiritual world and the material world. Now, we know that the spiritual world is ever existing, so there may not be a creation per se, but the whole spiritual world is existing. It's because it's ever existing on Lord Balaram. Right, so he is the actual basis for the spiritual world to exist, which of course makes sense because the spiritual world is existing for all of Krishna's pastimes, and Lord Balaram is that potency of Krishna, that power of Krishna that brings everything into existence for Lord Krishna's pastimes. So therefore, simply put, we can say Lord Balaram is expanding as everything that Krishna needs for his pastimes. Expands as the Lord's slippers, as his bed, as all the implements he uses. So even in the material world, whatever we are using for the Lord's service, right, all the articles, the implements, even, for example, the arti and the mridanga, all of these are expansions of Lord Balaram because they're part of the Lord's pastimes. So just as Lord Balaram is the basis of the spiritual world, he is also the one who brings everything into creation in the material world, because in the material world there's a clear creation and maintenance and destruction. So that Balaram actually achieves that because he expands into Mahavishnu. He is actually the source of Mahavishnu. And we said that Mahavishnu has 2 other aspects, Garbhodakshaya Vishnu and Kshiradakshaya Vishnu. So it's actually Lord Balaram who's responsible for all the functions of the Vishnus in this world. So Lord Balaram is actually the reason that this whole creation is. And his appearances, of course, are very significant to us, and we should be paying great attention to it, glorifying him, praying for his mercy. As our Balaram expands to be of service to the Lord, he can help us to be of service to the Lord. Thus, his other expansions are as the spiritual master. Right? The spiritual master is said to be the representation of Lord Balaram. So he gives us the spiritual strength, Bala, so that we can be of pleasure or Rama to Krishna, as well as destroying our anarthas, the many demons that Balaram killed in his pastimes in Vrindavan. And Lord Balaram helps destroy all those demons, all those demonic tendencies as well within us. And he is also his other important function is that he entered the womb of Devi to prepare for the appearance of Krishna before he left to be born as the son of Rohini. So he is preparing our hearts for Krishna as well. So we should open our hearts to him, to serving him, to loving him, and pray for his mercy to have that spiritual strength tomorrow so that we can reach the supreme goal. So, if we have some more time, we will read the Balabhadra Stavaraja to glorify him. I will apologize. I think I'm having any luck with my screen again, so I'm just going to find it and then send it to the group. So it's a very nice prayer in glorification of Lord Balaram. Okay, so just going to post this up now. Oh, if you could please post this on the page, page on the screen. And then we can read it. So if you're interested to see that it's actually Duryodhana that's speaking in this verse, these verses at the beginning, but Duryodhana was actually one of the great devotees of Lord Balaram. And of course, the spiritual master does show his mercy to even the demons, this is certain. But it's very interesting that it also depends on the sincerity of the follower. Duryodhana was not a sincere follower of the Lord, and this is the reason that he was destroyed in the end. So even though we do get the mercy of the spiritual master, we must also be sincere in receiving that mercy so that we can develop it properly and not be destroyed by our narkas. This is very significant. Okay, so if everyone could look at the chats, the words are there, and we'll just read them. Shri Balabhadra Stavaraja, the king of prayers to Lord Balaram. Duryodhana Vacha, Stotram Shri Baladevasya, Pradvipaka Mahamune, Vadamam Kripaya Sakshat, Sarvasiddhi Tadayakam. Shri Pradvipaka Uvacha, Stavarajan tu Ramasya, Vedavyasa Kritam Shubham, Sarvasiddhi Pradam Rajan, Shinu Kaivalyadam Rinam. Devadideva Bhagavan Kamapala Namostute, Namo Nantaya Sheshaya, Sakshadramaya Te Namaha, Dharadharaya Purnaya, Swadhamye Sirapanaye, Sahasra Shirase, Shirase Nityam, Namaha Sankarsanaya Te, Revati Ramana Tvam Vai, Baladeva Chittakraja, Palayuda Palambagna, Ahimam Purusottama, Palaya Balabhadra, Talankaya Namo Namaha, Ninambaraya Gauraya, Rohineyaya Te Namaha, Dhenukarir Mushtikari, Utarir Balavantakaha, Balantaka, Rukmiyarihi, Upakar Nari Umbandaris Swam Evam Kalindi Bhedano Si Dwam Astinapura Karshakaham Vivedare Yadavendro Rajamandala Mandanaham Kamsa Bhatri Prahantasi Tirthayatra Karaha Prabhu Duryodhana Guru Sakshat Pahi Pahi Prabhu Tu Ataham Jaya Jaya Chita Deva Parat Param Swayam Ananta Dik Anta Gata Shuta Sura Munindra Hanindra Charayate Musaline Baline Haline Namaha Yaha Patet Sadatam Stavanam Naraha Satu Harihe Paramam Padam Avrajit Jagati Sarva Balam Tu Ari Mardhanam Bhavati Tasya Dhanam Swajanam Dhanam. So we'll read the translation. Duryodhana said, O Pradvipaka, O great sage, please kindly tell me the prayer of Lord Balaram, which grants all protection. Shri Pradvipaka Muni said, O king, please hear the regal and beautiful prayer of Lord Balaram, a prayer that brings liberation and all perfection. O master of the demigods, O supreme personality of Godhead, O fulfiller of desires, obeisances to you. O Lord Anantashesh, obeisances to you. O Lord Balaram, obeisances to you. O Lord who maintains the earth, O glorious Lord, O perfect and complete Lord, O Lord who holds a plough in your hand, O Lord who has 1,000 heads, O Lord Sankarshan, eternal obeisances to you. O husband of Revati, O Lord Balaram, O elder brother of Lord Krishna, O Lord who holds a plough weapon, O killer of Pralambasura, O supreme personality of Godhead, please protect me. O Lord Balaram, who carries a palm tree flag, obeisances to you. O son of Rohini, O fair complexion, Lord dressed in blue garments, obeisances to you. You are the enemy of Dinaka, the enemy of Mushtika, the enemy of Kuta, the killer of Balvala, the enemy of Rukmi, the enemy of Kupakarna, and the enemy of Kumbanda. You are the Lord who broke the Yamuna and dragged Hastinapur. You are the enemy of Vivida. You are the king of the Yadavas. You are the ornament of Raja's circle. You are the killer of Kamsa's brothers. You are the supreme master, the Lord who went on pilgrimage, and Duryodhana's guru. O master, please protect me. Please protect me. O infallible Lord, greater than the greatest. O Lord, whose glories are heard in all directions without limit. Glory to you. Glory to you. O Lord, served by the demigods, the kings of the sages, and the kings of the serpents. O powerful Lord, who holds the plough and the club, obeisances to you. A person who regularly recites this prayer attains Lord Hari's transcendental abode. All the strength in the universe is his. He crushes his enemies. He attains great wealth and great dynasty. Shri Shri Krishna Balaram ki jai, Shri Shnitai Gaura Hari ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Shri Jolan Yatra ki jai. Thank you all so much for joining us. Sorry that we went on a bit, and sorry for the background noise. Some preparations for Lord Balaram's appearance day. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Thank you all so much. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Mataji. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Mataji. Tanda Pranam.